You are invited for the next edition of Game Jam Plus.
É criar o próximo grande jogo indie.
I'd like to invite my fellow flyover states and the rest of the world to come jam with us.
Mi nombre es Brian Hernández de Cartago, Costa Rica.
Patos de Minas, Minas Gerais.
Calgary, Canada.
Goiás.
São Luís.
Iran.
Liga Sul de Minas.
Portugal.
Brasília.
México. Salvador. Maquedônia.
Uberaba, Minas Gerais.
São José, Costa Rica.
Uberlândia.
La Paz, Bolivia.
Manaus, Amazônia.
United States Midwest.
Atlanta,
Slovenia.
Engenheiro Paulo Frontin.
Game Jam Plus. O que é Game Jam Plus?
En donde desarrolladores, músicos, artistas podrán crear su propio juego con un enfoque de negocios.
Participants from all around the world come together.
É o local onde suas ideias tomam forma.
Y me complace mucho invitarlos a este gran evento.
I feel thrilled and blessed to have such an opportunity to be a part of this.
And I want you to unlock this achievement too.
Que es un evento internacional que va a tomar lugar del 8 al 10 de octubre.
from October 8 to 10.
Entre el 8 y el 10 de octubre.
Dias 8 ao dia 10 de outubro.
This October, from the 8th to the 10th.
Dia 8 ao dia 10 de outubro.
Quiero invitarlos a formar parte de esta gran comunidad internacional.
It's going to be an incredible opportunity to make some games, meet some amazing people.
Espero haber más personas de todo el mundo participando de este gran evento.
Hope to see you there.
Participa, be our plus one.
Would you be our plus one?
Be a plus one.
Voi ter moi plus en.
Be our plus one.
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 Join us, be our plus one.
Be our plus one.
Hello everyone, it's an honor to have you here. So invite everyone to come up. We are on live with this warm-up event in Game Jam Plus 2021. I want to welcome you all and also you that is watching this recorded in YouTube. And today I'm honored to have Kate Edwards here with us. Please, Kate, come up to the stage.
Hi.
Hello. So, Kate, thank you for attending us today in this event on Game Jam Plus. You have a lot to tell us about your experience, your background. In a lot of senses, Global Game Jam inspires us as an event. So it's really, really great to have you here with us. So I think you can introduce yourself. Stage is yours, but I'm going to be in backstages waiting for the comments and questions. So if you have any questions, anything that you want to address to Kate, put in the comments that I'm going to make at the end of the presentation.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. It's great to be speaking with this community, and yeah, there's a lot of good stuff to talk about. I'm going to give a little talk today, which hopefully will be a bit inspiring as you're heading into Game Jam Plus next week. I know from my experience having run Global Game Jam for a couple of years now, but I've been involved as around the Global Game Jam for many, many years because I used to run the International Game Developers Association, from which the Global Game Jam originated many years ago. But I myself, as I'll mention in my talk, I've been around the game industry for going close to 28 years. So I've been around a while, and I've worked on a lot of games that you've probably heard of, stuff like Halo and Age of Empires and Mass Effect and Call of Duty and a whole bunch of other stuff.
I kind of heard about these games.
Yeah, little small indie games that became popular, right? Yeah, so I've been around a long time, and you know, I work with a lot of developers from all around the world. It's one of the biggest joys of mine, especially with me. My background as a geographer. You know, talking and interacting with people from around the world is something I most love to do.
That's really, really great. So, well, the stage is yours. Thank you for your time. It's awesome to have you here with us, and see you next your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, if you bring that up, and we will just kind of dive in here. So yeah, so I wanted to talk about a few things that a few suggestions that I would recommend to people as you're going into this game jam next week. And I know that you know, there's probably a lot of you who have had experience with participating in game jams, and there's probably some of you who have not before, which is great because that's part of the joy of game jams, is that it's welcoming of anybody of any level of skill, because that's part of the point, is to just get into it and enjoy it, and to see if this is something you really want to pursue. So on that note, one of the first things I'm going to mention as a point of advice is to chase your passions. This talk I'm giving is not just about game jams. This is also about your career and about the career path that you take. Because I've had a very strange career and a very, very strange career path, as you will see shortly. But the first thing that's really, really important, and I know this may sound like a cliche, but you really need to chase your passions. So for me, for example, I have a few passions that are really key to me. One is space and the space program. So I'm old enough. I'm 56. So I was 4 years old when humans landed on the moon for the first time in 1969. Now, this is not a picture of me, but this is basically exactly what I was doing. I was watching my grandmother's black and white television set, watching us step on the moon for the very first time, and I was just like amazed. I'm just like, it was so incredible to me, that this was happening, and so that really affected me, and I really had a strong desire to pursue that, very early in my childhood. So that became a very important theme that would go forward through a lot of my career. Another thing that was really big to me are a couple of things. One was cartography in general, the map making, and you might be able to recognize this map. This is actually the original sketch that J.R.R. Tolkien did of Middle-earth. You'll probably recognize this version a lot better. I'm assuming that most people have read Lord of the Rings, or they're at least aware of Lord of the Rings. This map had a huge influence on me because not only did I love these books, and I still love them, but the map that was in the book, this is what inspired me to become a cartographer, was the fact that Tolkien used cartography to bring a fictional universe to life through maps. And it really affected me in a big way, in a very positive way. And so that was something that would carry forward also video games, of course, because I'm old enough to where this was my first video game. I played on a console exactly like this in a store in Southern California where I grew up, and so that was my first experience ever playing a video game. And of course, ever since that time, it has had a huge influence on my life and my career direction, is my passion for games. And another thing that happened a few years later after this came out was this. The premiere of Star Wars. So the original Star Wars movie came out in 1977. I was 12 years old. And so that was for us in that era, we had never seen anything like this before. It was so groundbreaking, and it changed our reality in so many ways. And so that had a huge influence on me as well, was the fact that Star Wars existed, and that we could, basically see universes like that on the screen was a pretty special thing. So, so those are all passions that were really kind of influenced a huge part of my career direction, even to this day. So the next part is if you have these passions, you have to kind of discover yourself as well. Like, who are you? What do you want to do? What kind of, what do you want to achieve in this life and in the path that you're taking? So I mentioned that I had a weird career path, and you can see that this is the career path that I've taken. So basically, I put astronaut up there because that was my original aspiration. I wanted to be an astronaut when I left high school. And so I pursued aerospace engineering. I found out that my brain is not well suited to calculus. So I had a lot of artistic ability though. So I decided what I really want to do is to become a conceptual artist so I can work at Lucasfilm and work on a Star Wars movie. That was my second goal. So I pursued industrial design because I found out that most of the artists at the time at Lucasfilm, they had a background in industrial design. which is how they created the really cool storyboard art and the particular style that they used for the conceptual art. So I decided to pursue that, and I did, and it really did improve my skills tremendously. But then I decided, you know, I have always had a very strong interest in maps. I've had a big interest in travel and geography and cultures. And so I decided to change my major to geography because I could still take all that artistic skill and use it for creating maps. And then so that's exactly what I did. And so that put me on another completely different path. Now at that point, I'm like, well, I'm not going to be an astronaut. I'm not going to be an artist on Star Wars. So I went on a completely different path in which I used my skills I did a lot of work in VR in the early days. I did my master's thesis on VR way back in 1991 when VR really wasn't a thing yet. Then I got pulled into Microsoft to work at Microsoft as a cartographer on Encarta Encyclopedia, which if you don't know what Encarta is, that was the last major encyclopedia before Wikipedia was created online. And so my job at Microsoft evolved quite a bit, and I ended up going there, having a 13-year career at Microsoft. And then I left Microsoft in 2005 and became a culturalization consultant to basically focus on video games, because it was at Microsoft is where I started my career in games, working on a lot of the early games, you know, like I mentioned, like, you know, Halo, Age of Empires, Fable, Forza, all of those games, you know, MechWarrior, Asheron's Call, Flight Sim, all of those kinds of games I worked on while I was at Microsoft. And so that really is where I found what I considered to be my perfect job, doing this geography related work, culturalization on video games. And so I basically found, or I guess sort of created for me, the most perfect job I could imagine. I left, you know, then as I've been doing that consulting work ever since 2005, I also started to become more focused on advocacy work in the game industry. So I became the executive director of the International Game Developers Association, because I have a strong desire to see the game industry be better, to get rid of its sexist and racist and toxic environments that we see at a lot of companies. So that was part of my reason why I became IGDA executive director. And then, of course, more recently, over the last couple of years, I've been the executive director of the Global Game Jam, because I just think it's a fantastic effort. You know, just like Game Jam Plus, it's an effort to bring people together and to have them, you know, basically discover the joy of making games. So I had to ask myself, though, as many of us do through our career path, you know, who am I? And I'm sure a lot of you ask that question often, you know, who exactly am I? What do I want to be? And it's not easy. You know, there's a lot of answers to that question, because at any given moment, we are many different things. You know, I am if you take the Myers-Briggs personality test, I am an introvert, an INTP. I am faking being an extrovert right now. And, you know, I have a daughter, so I'm a parent. There's a lot of other things I've done. Geek, I'm absolutely a geek, as you can easily tell from pictures like this. Yeah, this was me giving a lecture in Norway. And I'm dressed as Indiana Jones because the lecture took place on Halloween. And so this is how geeky this is. I'm dressed as Indiana Jones, but I'm talking about Force lightning because I'm discussing my work on Star Wars: The Old Republic. So I'm demonstrating Force lightning while I'm dressed as Indiana Jones. So yeah, and it gets worse. You know, I have a huge passion for travel. So like I like to visit places like Star Wars filming locations. A couple years ago when I was in Ireland, I visited this island of Skellig Michael, where they did scenes, of course, from the more recent Star Wars films. So at one point I had to ask myself, you know, what exactly do I do? And like I said, who am I? And I had somebody challenge me with that question a few years ago, and it really I didn't know how to answer that question. But ultimately I thought about it, and I told them, I said, what I think I am is a cultural change catalyst. So what does that mean? I basically like to try and change culture where I see a need for it. And so I've done it on a different levels. The first is I've done it in game. So that's my culturalization work. That's me applying my skill to make sure that the games are inclusive, to make sure that they are welcoming of players from all kinds of cultures around the world. So that's one level. The other level has been trying to change the culture within game companies, such as creating processes to make sure that they are creating games that are inclusive and diverse, and creating games that are respectful of players all around the world. And then the third level was actually trying to change the game industry, which is where the advocacy work comes in that I've been doing over the past 10 years or so. And so that's really, though, at my core, that's what I do. I see something that I think needs to be fixed or improved, and I do it. I'm attracted to problems, I guess. And so that's basically what I discovered. That's what I think I've been doing for most of my career, is trying to be a catalyst for cultural change. So why is this important to me? Well, part of it is because I love games, and games, as we all know, is a global phenomenon. But not only that, but games, especially one of the reasons why I do this culturalization work is because the growth in the game industry, as I think a lot of us understand, is not in traditional markets. In like North America and Europe, where a lot of developers will create a game and they'll say, I want my game to sell in the United States. I want my game to sell in the UK or Germany, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is not where the growth is happening. You look at the numbers, and of course there's more updated numbers for 2021, but basically there's very strong growth. Latin America, Middle East and Africa, Asia Pacific, of course, is still growing, especially in Southeast Asia. So there's these other markets, though, where a lot of game developers I meet, even in a lot of markets around the world, they're still focused on like Europe and North America as being kind of the place where they need to release their game. But I would encourage them that that's not necessarily the case. The world is hungry for game content, not just North America and Europe, which tend to be very crowded with a lot of different games and very saturated. So that's one reason I love being in this industry, though, is because it is such a huge force that is growing and growing. The other reason I love working in the game industry is the fact that we are an economic powerhouse. So now these numbers are a bit old here, but the proportions are still the same. In fact, the proportions are a little bit different now. Games are even larger proportion compared to a lot of these other forms of entertainment. So if you look at books that are sold, or movies, or live music, or any of these other things, look at how much money games produce by comparison. And if you were to take every live sport on earth, FIFA and all the other forms of live sport, even those would still be shadowed by the game industry. So we are a huge business. And a lot of times I meet a lot of people in the game industry who think it's like, they still kind of have this like startup mentality where it's like, well, yeah, your company might be in startup mode, but we as an industry, and more importantly, as a cultural force, are a very big deal. And I think that's significant. We should embrace that as people who love games and game creation. Another reason I love games is because it is something that humans do. This is something that we have been doing since the beginning of human history. These are just examples of different types of games from different cultures around the world. And we as human beings, that's exactly what we do. We are built, and our brains are built for gameplay. And we know it's not unique to humans either. There's a lot of other animals out there who play. They have different forms of play. Now, they're obviously not playing structured games like this, but they actually have play as part of their existence. And so it's interesting, I think, that we have expressed that as human beings right from the start. And so it's also embracing an activity that is not new at all. This is something that we do and have been doing long before television existed, long before radio, long before all these other forms of entertainment and movies. We were playing games. So in a way, I see games are actually the more consistent form of entertainment throughout human history compared to all these other forms of media. And to me, that's exciting. So if you look at, for example, all these other forms of media that have existed, one thing that I think is really cool in the way that I view video games is that we are at the forefront of the evolution of human narrative. So basically all these other forms of art and communication that have been developed over the millennia, they have all served to convey story from one generation to another. And video games right now, we are at the cutting edge of how we are evolving storytelling from one generation to another. And again, that to me, that's very exciting, and that's a really cool place to be. And it's another reason why I love working in the game industry. So just so if you're curious about the culturalization work I do, I'll give you a couple examples. So basically what I do as a geographer working in the game industry is I help the game creators who are creating game worlds see how is the content they're creating going to be compatible with the local worldviews of the different markets into which their game is going to go be sold. And so it's basically this sort of this interesting exercise where we're trying to see what content assets will be compatible with the local culture and which ones will be incompatible. And that's my job. That's basically what I try and help developers see what issues might show up depending on where this game is going to go. So, for example, when I worked on the original Age of Empires series, we had this particular historical scenario, which shows the Japanese invading the Korean peninsula over there on the left in red. And that's what history tells us really happened. The Japanese invaded the Chosun Empire in Korea and basically almost took it over. But when the game was released in Korea, the Korean government said that this never happened, meaning that history, the way that we recorded history here, is not correct, according to the Korean government. So in order for us to sell this game in Korea, we actually had to change history. So we actually released a patch only for Korean players that shows Korea invading Japan instead of Japan invading Korea. Now, as you might imagine, this created a huge debate about ethics and the nature of truth. Like, is this the right thing to do? But honestly, this became one of those business requirements. If you want to sell into Korea, we had to make a choice whether or not we're going to allow this change in history only for the Korean market, because we're trying to meet the local expectations. And for a lot of different business reasons, we felt that we had to do this because we basically needed to get into the Korean market because it's such a popular market for games. And so that was the decision that was made. It's basically making this cultural adaptation of the content. Things like I've worked on all the Dance Central games, which deal with, of course, with a lot of body language and gestures. And so, of course, gestures can be really sensitive too. They're very specific to different cultures, such as the gesture there on the left that he's doing is almost similar to a gesture which is the same as the middle finger, where you're putting your fist across your elbow. It's not exactly the same, but it's close. The gesture that she's doing on the right, which is the rock-on gesture, which we recognize, from rock and roll. But in Italy, that symbol means I'm sleeping with your wife. So, it's very culturally specific. So you have to be very careful about those kinds of things. Even things like this, when I worked on Ninja Gaiden, where you can see where it says country select, and then it has the flag of Taiwan, and then it says ROC. ROC meaning Republic of China. Now, both the flag of Taiwan and the term ROC will get you instantly banned in China because they do not like seeing Republic of China. They do not like seeing the Taiwan flag. So what you're seeing right here is a very strong political statement, because you're saying that the Republic of China is a country. And so this is a very problematic thing to do if you want your game to sell in China. But there's an easy way to fix this. As you'll see, basically we take the flag out because you don't really need it. It's redundant information. You use the term Taiwan because Taiwan is applicable to both. It's acceptable to both China and Taiwan. And then you say country/region because that introduces a certain level of vagueness. So is Taiwan a country or region? Well, it depends on where you're sitting. Maybe if you're in Taiwan and you're pro-independence, you would say it's a country. If you're in China and you believe that Taiwan's a province of China, then you say it's a region. But basically, you make this a perception issue for the user rather than you, as the creator, asserting what is truth or not and getting yourself into trouble. So that's just a few examples. So that's basically, I discovered myself. I'm a cultural change catalyst. I do culturalization work, and I love doing what I love this work. It's really exciting for me. I've been doing it for so long, and I'm still excited to do it every single day. The other thing that you need to think about, besides, finding your passions, discovering who you are, is finding your superpowers, which is part of the process of discovering who you are. I firmly believe that every single one of you has superpowers. We all have superpowers of some kind. It's just a matter of how do you reveal them? How do you bring them to the surface so that you can see them and others can see them too? So for example, looking back at my own past, I created this team at Microsoft. I worked on all these Microsoft games, which was a great amount of fun. I created a geopolitical team at Google after I left Microsoft. I've worked on a lot of things I can't mention. I've been able to travel the world to a lot of amazing places around the world. I do a lot of writing and other creative projects. So I've been doing all this stuff. Now, a few years ago, about 10 years ago or so, I kind of hit a crisis. And it was a crisis that I was having a lot of struggles with, even though I had already accomplished a lot of stuff in my career, but that I was not able to really see that. And the problem is that every single time I was sending an email to one of my clients, like to give them the results of my work, I was super nervous. Like, I was really nervous that this is the moment. This is the moment when they're going to find out that I'm a fraud. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm an imposter. I'm a fake. And so I know that a lot of people out there listening to this, they feel that same way a lot with your own work. Like, you don't feel like your work is good enough, or you're just, you struggle with that. And so I was having that problem too, but I was saved. Something happened to me that actually kind of pulled me out of that thinking, and I was actually saved by The Matrix, of all things. So let me explain what I'm talking about. So as you know, I'm a geek, and one of the geeky things I love is I love movie music, movie scores from film. I listen to a lot of movie scores. So one time here in Seattle, where I'm based, the Seattle Symphony did a special symphony where they showed the entire Matrix movie, the first Matrix movie, really the only Matrix movie. They showed it above the stage while the orchestra played the entire score of the film, live during the film. And the original composer of the music, Don Davis, was there to conduct his own music on stage. So it was super cool. It was really fun to see. Now, I've seen this movie many, many times, and I'm very familiar with it. But I'm sitting there in the Symphony Hall, and it's during the time where I was struggling with this issue about why do I feel this way when I'm sending my emails to my clients? Why do I feel so nervous, even though I've had years of experience doing this work? And basically what happened is we got to this one scene in the film, which if you've seen the original Matrix movie, which I hope everybody has, you get to this one scene where the mentor to the protagonist, Morpheus, he says those words to Neo. He says, "Don't think you are, know you are." Now, the moment I heard that, when I'm sitting in the Symphony Hall watching this movie again, I just start crying my eyes out, because this hit me really hard in that moment where I was trying to, dealing with this struggle around, how do I get out of this feeling like I'm an imposter? And so when he says this on screen, "Don't think you are, know you are," it kind of lit up in my brain. I suddenly understood that now I understand what the issue is. What's the issue? The issue is that my disbelief in my own skills does not make them disappear, and they're not invisible to people around me. And the same for you. Just because you don't believe in your skills doesn't mean that they don't exist. So you have to know the reality of what others perceive in you, even if you struggle to think you have those skills or not. So basically, it's don't think you are, know you are. So you basically have to take it on a certain level of faith that the people around you who are praising you for your work, they're paying you to do a certain job, they know what they're talking about. They can see the value in your work, even if you have a struggle to see it in yourself. And it's a really difficult thing to get past, but it's a very necessary thing for us to get through. And I see this all the time in the game industry. I mentor a lot of people, a lot of students, and a lot of younger people in the game industry people who want to go in the game industry. And they struggle with this all the time. So basically what we're talking about is the phenomenon called imposter syndrome. And this is basically what it looks like. It's where you walk around thinking that what you know is just a tiny little bit compared to what everyone around you knows. But that's just not the reality. The reality is that what you know is pretty much the same as everybody else. We have different levels of skill, we have different levels of experience, but that doesn't mean that you know less necessarily. And if you think that one on the left looks sort of like a Death Star, that's kind of what I was going for, as you can see. And, you know, so don't think of the Death Star, think of the nice flower instead. Don't think about the imposters who would like to have a Death Star. Anyway, think about the nice flower. The reality is that what you know is similar to what everyone else knows. So this quote, I love this quote. The American writer Mark Twain said this, of course, many years ago, but I love this. He said, "Comparison is the death of joy." And the reason I use this quote is because oftentimes when I talk to people who are struggling with this issue, comparison is what's fueling their doubt. The fact that they're looking at other people's work, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's in a workplace, or even worse, on social media, where they're looking at what all these people around them are doing on social media, and they're saying, wow, I will never be that good. I will never get to that level of skill. That's just not true. It's not true. You can't predict where you're going to go, but you can control the level of skill that you build. So for example, if you see somebody in your classroom and you say, I wish I could do I wish I could draw as well as she, or I wish I could code as well as her, or whatever, guess what? You may have just found a mentor. You can always go ask that person and see if they're willing to help you and to help teach you to get to that level that they're at. And that's one of the things I love about the game industry, is that most everyone I know in this industry is super helpful. They love helping other people. They're often very eager to talk about their work and to talk about how they do things. And so I think it's just, we have to overcome our own shyness or our reluctance to go out and ask. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. It's the people who ask for help who are the ones who tend to be most successful that I've met. So for example, I'm going to compare a couple things for you. These are both portraits, but I can ask you the question, which one is better? Now, you might have a preference on which one you like better, but the reality is that both of these, that's a Rembrandt on the left, that's Picasso on the right, considered two of the greatest artists in human history, but their styles are completely different. Same with games, both of these styles are completely valid. They're just different. The one on the left isn't necessarily better, it's just different. But they're both very valid styles. I know some remarkably talented pixel artists who get criticized because people look down on the pixel art as being it's kind of like substandard compared to like photorealistic. I think we need to, get rid of that thinking. These are style differences that are completely valid. So what you need to do, though, to kind of get past that and get through this, just like I had to do when I was dealing with this issue that, that the Matrix saved me from, you have to embrace the adversity that you're dealing with. You can't run from it, because the more you run from it, the longer this is going to be a problem. So I see this as basically embracing it as your crucible. It's your forge where you're going to address the issue and become something different. If you follow the writings of Joseph Campbell, who wrote books like The Power of Myth that talks about the hero's journey, he called this the supreme ordeal, where every hero goes from being a, quote, normal person to being a superhero or to being a hero, but they had to go through a supreme ordeal and come out the other side, and that's where they embrace their superpowers. So for me, I went through this process and came out the other side. And what was interesting is that, you have to find that courage to accept your superpowers. And that's the toughest part. It's the battle within yourself. And game jams are a great place to discover your superpowers. It's in that intense forge of a few days of jamming where sometimes those skills just kind of come to the surface naturally. So that's why I really encourage you to take part in game jams like Game Jam Plus to do this. So when I asked myself after this process, who am I? Basically, the answer was I'm someone who decided to care about what's going on around me and actually do something about it. And that's when I started becoming more active in advocacy issues in the game industry and trying to make a difference as for the industry, because I decided I really wanted to change it. And a lot of it was being driven by this idea that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And I actually made a conscious decision that I will not be that person who does nothing. I am going to stand up and speak my mind and to take action as I can, you know, to basically try and make a positive difference on the people around me and on the situation around me. So what was interesting is that after I came out of this process, I had friends telling me that I seemed different. And this is the word they use most often. They said, you seem fierce. Like before you were, you know, you were just you, but now you seem like you're driven and you're fierce, like you're on fire, like you're really trying to make something happen. And they were right. That's exactly how I felt. And it's actually around the same time where I started cosplaying a lot more for a couple of reasons. One is because my daughter is a costume designer. That helps, but also because I love the feeling of cosplay. Because like I get a lot of people asking me like, why do you cosplay as Thor, like in this picture? And I say it's because it's the external representation of how I feel about myself, which I like. I feel kick-ass, and it's kind of cool to kind of look kick-ass every once in a while too. So I like taking this concept of being a warrior poet, which you've probably heard of. You know, you're a fighter, but you're a thinker. And I think in the game industry, we need people who are creators and advocates, not just creating games, but thinking about how not only are your games, but also your actions as a individual in this industry. How are you making change positive, even around the people immediately around you, on your Game Jam team, in the Game Jam environment, in the, you know, in the broader context in which you live. And so we want to make sure, you know, we need to support our community through our actions and by, you know, who we are. So that's why, for example, I became executive director of IGDA, was because I really wanted to support my community. I've worked with remarkable people in the game industry. I love the people in the game industry. I love the creators, every person who's involved, from the legal people to the HR people, to the artists, to the coders, to the writers, everybody else, the audio people, everyone. I've just worked with amazing people. And so I wanted to find a way, how do I make life better for them? Is there a way for me to do that? And so I had a great time, you know, working in this role. It was not an easy role. There was a lot of issues that we were trying to take on. Like I was running IGDA back during the time of Gamergate, which was a very challenging time in our industry a few years ago. But we were trying to, you know, take on a lot of issues, you know, that we thought would make a big difference in the industry. And so after I left the IGDA in 2017, I also joined the board of TakeThis.org, which deals with mental health in the game industry, because that's a very important issue, I know, to a lot of game developers. And then, of course, took over the Global Game Jam a couple of years ago. So, you know, our mission in the Global Game Jam is pretty simple: to empower individuals worldwide to learn, experiment, create together through the medium of games. And I think that's really a mission that a lot of game jams follow as well. So, you know, we've had a pretty big additions. Our scale is pretty large when we run Global Game Jam. You can see here, even our pandemic edition that we did last year, we knew that we were going to have lower numbers, but we still had a lot more people than we expected. So we were really excited about that. And the other thing that I would also encourage you to do is, even if you get to a point in your career where you're very happy, which is awesome, you're happy with what you do, you love your work, but you can always keep iterating. Because even me, with all the stuff that I've done last year during the pandemic, because I was not traveling as much, I actually co-founded a company called SetJetters, and we have created an app for iPhone and iOS that lets you find filming locations around the world, because this is something that I love to do, because here I am in Norway, leaning against what's known as Han Solo Rock that they use for filming The Empire Strikes Back. It's a huge passion of mine, and I turned that passion into a company and into an app because I had extra time on my hands. And so you're never too old, it's never too late to keep iterating, you know, even when you're in your mid-50s like I am. So Last thing I'm going to mention is just because I'm here is that, in addition, to we do have the Global Game Jam coming up in January, in late January. We're going to open up site registrations on November 1st. So basically just a month away. So we hope that if you love game jams, if you have a great experience with Game Jam Plus, we really hope that you'll join us as well for Global Game Jam in January. So there you go. That's the end of my session. And if there's any questions or comments, I'd love to take them.
Well, okay, thank you. It was really, really inspired. I was thinking a lot of things that you talked about, and we had a lot of comments in there agreeing with your proposition, especially about the imposter syndrome that we have in our industry. So there was a lot of people here that, for example, we had Eduardo Husov, is a veteran game industry guy that make a presentation yesterday in warm-up event. He was here and said that veterans also feels the same thing. It's not only a thing that newcomers in the industry feels.
No, not at all. I gave a keynote talk at GCAP in Melbourne a few years back, and I mentioned imposter syndrome in that talk. And afterwards, I had one developer. He came up to me. He's a programmer, and he'd been in the game industry longer than I have, and he was almost in tears because he said, "I never heard the problem I've been struggling with. I have never heard it framed that way before," because he didn't really know what imposter syndrome was. But now all of a sudden he realized that he's been dealing with imposter syndrome for over 25 years. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. This is not a young person's issue. It tends to show up more in younger people, but just because you're like getting started with your career and everything. But it's a human condition. It's not related to age or anything really.
And this kind of feeling leads us to unhealthy work environment. So we feel that we are imposters, so we try to work more than we can to deliver more than we are possible to provide. So we know that in a game development, you never finish a game. You abandon the project. There is always things that you can improve, include or new phases, new worlds, new maps, new characters. There is always a thing that you can improve your game. So you abandon the project. So it was really, really interesting when you said that, because it's all our feeling that we are not good enough to make what we are doing.
Yeah, well, that's part of the challenge of any creative work. And games is just one example of creative work. But this is why, for example, in the film industry, there's a reason why they release director's cuts on DVD. Why do they release a director's cut? Well, it's because the director didn't have time to finish their vision of the creative product. And so sometimes those director's cuts will show up years later. Like if you look at the original Blade Runner movie, I mean, that's gone through many different versions until I think now the final version's called like the ultimate cut, where it's like the final director's cut, which is fine because we know that creative work is always going to go on. And that's why I know that in all the years I've worked in games, oftentimes when you're working on a game team and you have your release date and people will have like a content complete date, and everyone kind of laughs when they say content complete, because like it's never going to be complete. It just has to get to a point where it's good enough to meet the goals of what the game was really setting out to do. Like, for example, right now, I mean, we pretty much wrapped up work on Age of Empires 4 that I've been working on for over 2 years. We're currently working on Dragon Age 4 and a bunch of other stuff too. And, I already know like Dragon Age 4 is still a ways out in terms of its release, but I can already see that there's going to be a lot of stuff that we never finish, and it's just accepting that, where do you get to the point where you say, okay, you know what, you have to keep reminding yourself of your original creative vision and creative goal. And this is often though where we get into those problems of having crunch time and toxic studio culture because they didn't plan well enough, or they don't know when to say no. That's one of the biggest problems I've seen in this industry, is that the project managers, they need you to say, you know what, that's a great idea. Let's save it for DLC. Let's stay focused on just releasing what we said we were going to release. So
Yeah, that's awesome. It's an important reflection about mental health in our industry when we talk about this stuff. And these enter in the. Let's talk a little bit about game jams. So we are talking about an event with 48 hours, 72 hours top developing a game, and it's really difficult to feel that you perform as best as you can in this short term period of time. So what, with our experience, many years working with game jams, what is possible to create into this time restrained environment?
That's a great question, and it's funny because I've gotten some criticism from people who because they'll say, "You for years I've spoken out against crunch, and yet game jams are crunch." That's exactly what they are. But there's a big difference though, because to me, crunch is what happens when you're working at a company and like the top management says you will work 18 hours a day. That's crunch. A game jam is an opt-in opportunity. It's something that you've chosen to do. You know what you're getting into. It's basically you're putting yourself into a state of creative flow for 48 hours. And for a lot of creative people, that they love the energy that comes with that. It's not that you're not doing it every weekend. You're not doing it every, it's a very rare thing that you do every once in a while, maybe every few months. And I think on that level, that's perfectly fine, especially because you're choosing to do it. It's basically the same way as saying, you know what, I'm going to take a backpack and go hiking up in the hills for 2 days, and then I'll be back. I mean, it's not going to be an easy activity. You're going to be dirty and smelly and all that, but you're going to have fun. You know what you're getting into. So I kind of see it on the same level, but I think in terms of expectations in a game jam, what you first and foremost is that, to me, a game jam, it's about the collaboration. That's what it's all about. Whether or not you actually produce a final game that's going to be working really well, obviously that would be nice to have. But to me, the better part of a game jam is that you have made friends, you have made new colleagues, you've learned how to work together, you learned how to solve problems together, because all of those skills, that's what you're going to need to work in the game industry, because you have to learn how to work really well with other people around you, especially people you don't know. And so I think learning those collaboration skills and how do you negotiate creative choices and things like that, that is super important. Now, if you, within the context of a game jam, within 48 hours, if you're able to actually produce something, even if it's a very rough prototype, that's totally fine. We've seen some very, very successful games come out of the Global Game Jam, like Superhot, for example, the VR game that was prototyped during the Global Game Jam several years ago. And the earliest version they made was very simple, very, very simple. But they took that very core idea, that rough prototype, and of course they evolved that into what now has been a incredibly successful game. And that's totally fine, because really what you're looking for is what game mechanic works. And that's really the essence of the game, the very core essence of the gameplay, which is the game design, and does your little core loop actually work. All the visuals and everything else, that's great if you have the time to get all that done. But really, it's like if you can just conceive of the game and actually have a very rough prototype that demonstrates the basic, core design, then I would consider that a victory.
Yeah, it's all about scope and organize your ideas and validate your ideas in a prototype. You don't need to deliver a final release game in a game jam, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take some questions from the audience.
Yes.
There is a lot of comments here. I think the first one is from Komentakako. He said, what do you think about the business process of Game Jam Plus? So here in Game Jam Plus, we have this plus. So it's not only about create game in 48 hours, but it's about to try to understand it as a product and continue to produce them afterwards, after the Game Jam. The best things for every place. So what do you think about this model in terms, especially comparing with the idea of a global game jam, there is the different approach?
Yeah, I think both they're very complementary approaches, of course. I mean, Global Game Jam is really focused on the collaboration and education aspect. So that's really what our event is about. But I think having that additional step of learning pitching and learning basically how do you take your idea and basically turn it into a business, because I think that is one thing that a lot of developers miss, especially indie developers. I meet a lot of eager students who want to make the game because they have this vision for a really cool game, but oftentimes you have to remind them you are creating a game, but ultimately you're creating a business. That's what you're really creating here. And sometimes they miss that point, but all you have to do is ask them simple questions like, okay, let's say you finish your game, your team of 2 or 3 people, you finish the game and you release it on Steam or wherever. Let's say it becomes successful. Then what happens? Who are you going to hire first? I don't know. It's like, well, so you kind of go down these questions like, well, how are you going to handle payroll? It's like, what? It's like, well, I mean, you have to think about this stuff. It's like you are starting a business. So I think it's really great that you add that structure to kind of already get people thinking about, it's not just about making the game. It's basically how do you make the game, but then you have to learn how to pitch it, which is an incredibly important skill. Pitching is something that takes practice. Trust me, I've run a lot of pitch events all around the world. I've been a judge for a lot of pitching events. Pitching is a skill for sure that you really have to get down. And again, with pitching, it's not just, it's basically how can you describe and the essence of your game and make it stand out against the many, many hundreds, if not thousands of other ideas that are out there. And that's not easy. So I love the fact that you are, already helping people down that path, because that's super important.
Launch the game is not the finish line. Is in fact the first step.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think you're exactly right. Finishing the game is actually starting the whole process.
That's great. Let's take another question. Well, Ivan Kikerkov is from North Macedonia, and he loves the talk. And there is any IGDA representatives in there, and he know how to be trained to become one IGDA representatives. And expanded these questions. In fact, we have a lot of communities like Cabo Verde, Namibia, Madagascar, a lot of places all over the world with very early stage game development community.
Right.
How they can be helped with these international communities out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I don't run the IGDA anymore. I left over 4 years ago, so I don't really have anything to do with the IGDA anymore. You'd have to reach out to them to talk about that. But what I can say is what's important is to basically, if you don't have a local community, it's not that difficult to start one. There's a lot of great Discord servers out there. There's a lot of great communities out there. Even the Global Game Jam has a Discord server with a ton of people on it. Basically what's really important is to have a local community with whom you can talk to about, and share. Like here in Seattle, we have a fantastic group called Seattle Indies, which has been really successful in holding regular meetings. And I love the spirit of all of their gatherings. Of course, they didn't, virtual gatherings during the pandemic, but it's great because people come together and it's a very collaborative atmosphere where people will show well, here's kind of where I'm at with my game, or they'll say, hey, I'm having a problem with this little, piece of code, or I can't get this to work. Can anyone help me? And it's just, it's basically everyone comes together because it's not a competition. I mean, theoretically, every game could be popular. Every game could be successful. It just doesn't work that way because of market forces. But we're not necessarily competing against each other, unless you say, well, I'm gonna, I want to create a game called, something like Halo, and make a first-person shooter. Well, good luck with that one. So, but I think, it's important to find your community if you don't have one. There definitely are communities. I mean, IGDA is one source. I mean, there's a lot of communities that are around different events. Like in your region, there's the Reboot Develop Conference that normally takes place in Dubrovnik, which I've visited many times. so there tends to be like a good community around there. So if you don't find one immediately, like in North Macedonia, you might find ones adjacent that at least you can attach yourself to, because my point is that you really need to be talking to other developers, because that's how you learn, that's how you grow your skills, that's how you can show people also what you're capable of doing. And so one way or another, I would get connected. And you could try reaching out to IGD as well and see if you want to start a chapter there.
And in fact, that's one of the things that I'm more passionate about Game Jam Plus, is not only the event itself, but the community of ecosystem leaders that meet with each other, exchange experience, exchange contacts, make network, learn with each other. So these kind of international events also train community leaders. So it's really, really interesting how these networks are formed, this collaboration are formed. It's really, really fun. We have another really interesting question from Carlos Eduardo, is how do you relax being in a creation position when even something like watching a movie feels like you are working or seeking inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's hard because it's hard because when you're in a creative space, like for example, I mentioned my daughter's a costume designer and that's what she does for a living. And for her, if she's watching a movie, she's looking at the costumes. So she's like analyzing the costumes and like, wow, how did they do that? And, or yes, I think I can do that. For example, she created it like a perfect recreation of the Doctor Strange costume from the movie that she wore. It's a remarkable costume. She spent like 400 hours on it. But that she kind of gets obsessed with that thing, kind of dissecting the creative aspect of it. I think that's natural for all of us. I mean, like me with my culturalization background, anytime I see anything, I'm kind of already looking for stuff that might be sensitive, even though I'm just watching the movie. I have nothing to do with it. I can't call them up and say, hey, you got this wrong. But it's natural for us to lean into what we know best. So I think part of it is that you just have to, it does take a certain level of, I would say, like Jedi discipline to just kind of remind yourself, just be calm, just kind of, just relax into your skills. And as you watch these things and absorb these things, try and enjoy the narrative that as it's intended. But there's nothing wrong with having that kind of little second voice in your head that's observing and picking up on things, because I do it all the time. I watch a lot of stuff because my watching like a lot of geek content, for example, informs my work. It actually helps my work tremendously. By knowing how other people did things. And I think we all do that in the game industry as well, because we get inspiration from film and TV and books and everything else. And that's fine. But I think just try and, as best as you can, you kind of have to discipline yourself to just relax and watch it. But then it's okay to observe, or even if you promise yourself, you know what, I'm going to just watch it, but then maybe I'm going to rewatch it more from that working mindset. And I'm going to like take notes for things that I see that might be interesting to me. But it takes a lot of practice to me. It takes that Jedi discipline, really.
Yeah, that's great. That's one of the things that you mentioned in your presentation, in all the presentations, that you are a geographer, you are working in the game industry. And there's a lot of person out there that they think that you need to be a programmer or artist to participate in the game industry. And one of the things that we want to invite for Game Jam Plus or all game jams like Global Game Jam, if you are not programmer or artist, there is some skills that you have that can help the games being
Absolutely.
produced. So what do you say as a geographer that has been in the game industry for dozens of years? There is place for all kind of skills in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, and I've told people, if I can find a way, if a geographer can find a way to be in the industry this long, anybody can. Anybody can figure it out. I mean, I know people who have backgrounds in history. I know an astrophysicist. I know an ethnomusicologist who works in games. I know people, of course, there's a lot of psychologists as well. There's many psychologists who are actually doing psychology in user research now. There's a lot of different backgrounds that are being leveraged across the game industry, not, whether for that specific skill or they use those skills in the jobs that they're doing, which are not related to their original skill. But the point is that there is room for everyone. So like if you wanted to do a job similar like to what I did, where I'm actually every day I'm applying my geographic background to the games, I had to be really creative in how I did that. I basically was able to do that in the position I had at Microsoft. And the way I created my team, I created a special new team at Microsoft. I decided one day I was going to write a proposal to create this new kind of team that would help the company understand these kind of risk issues, like the cultural risk and political risk issues, because nobody at Microsoft was doing it. They were assuming that localization was doing it or the legal people were doing it, but the reality is that nobody was doing it. So I found that there was a gap, and I wrote a proposal to fill the gap, but I got rejected 4 times by different VPs at Microsoft over the period of 7 months. But I did not give up because I knew I had a good idea. Maybe that's me being arrogant, but I felt very strongly that this company needs this work. So I did not give up. After 4 rejections, I went to a 5th VP, and he approved it in 5 minutes. And it turned out that one VP, it was Paul Moritz. He's not there anymore, but Paul Moritz was from South Africa. He was the only VP I talked to who was not from the United States. And so he understood right away. In fact, when I gave him my quick little pitch, he said, "I thought we're doing this already." I'm like, "No, that's why I'm here." And so he's like, "Well, we need to do this." And I'm like, "Well, I agree. Well, here's my proposal." He's like, "Let's do this." I'm like, "Okay." So you have to have that perseverance, because so you might have to get creative in how you find a way for your skill set to fit in the industry. But I'm sure, depending, you might have to try different companies, you might have to try different avenues to get your idea in there. But I know there's a way, because the game industry is growing so huge and more diverse content all the time. It needs additional skill for sure.
There is so many skills that we need in our industry. It's a shame that if you block yourself in any way in these terms. And curiously, we have Melina here in the chat.
I just saw.
She's a narrative designer here in Brazil, and she's also a geographer. So
high five from North America. Great to.
That's really, really awesome. I have just one last quick question. That it's how do you see Brazil in a global context in the game industry?
Brazil has been a creative force for sure. I mean, there's been a lot of great things happening. I mean, of course, when we do the Global Game Jam, we have a ton of sites across Brazil, which is always really cool. When I went to the big festival in Sao Paulo a few years ago, I was really blown away by the visual quality of a lot of the games. It's interesting that you see kind of this kind of regional expertise, so to speak, that comes through. And I think what I saw, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical here, but I know that Brazil already as a culture has a very strong visual aesthetic. You see it everywhere you go. You see it in the clothes people wear. You see it in just the artwork that comes from Brazil. And I saw that in the games that I was playing at the big festival. I'm just like, wow, there's just such a strong visual vibe, so to speak, coming out of the games compared to like what you would see in another region. Of course, you see that in a lot of regions, but it just seemed particularly sharp in Brazil. And just like when I was in Iran a few years ago, I saw they have their visual style is quite different, but what they were stronger on was their technical skill, because Iran produces the 3rd most engineers in the world after the US and Russia. So and that was really coming through. A lot of their games had really incredible technical capability. The visual parts were not quite as strong, So I was kind of like thinking, well, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could get some Brazilian and Iranian developers together and see what they can come up with? So, but yeah, I think Brazil is becoming, well, it's already is a force in the industry, but I think there's a tremendous amount of talent throughout the country, and it's it's showing more and more. And so I'm glad that they're still doing events like the big festival and some of the other events to just really elevate and make that known, because that's super important.
really, really cool. And that's one of our dreams, to connect talents from all over the world to collaborate and create awesome things with their different cultural backgrounds and technical skills and all this stuff. Definitely is one of our dreams.
Well, and I think if there's one thing we can thank the pandemic for, even though it's been a tragedy for this planet, it has accelerated our ability to work together across boundaries and to work virtually. We knew it was already kind of happening anyway, but it really did accelerate it to a certain degree. And so I think if there's any good thing that we can take away from it, it's that we have that virtual connection. I think is a lot stronger now than it was even 2 years ago.
That's really great, especially for this emerging ecosystems that is geographically far from the center of the industry.
Yes.
It was really, really important, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we run out of time right now. It's a shame because I love it. So it was really, really great. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And I hope we can collaborate further. I think there is a lot of synergies between Game Jam Plus, Global Game Jam. And
Yeah.
In the end of the day, we have the same dream. We want to create some impactful thing that helps game developers and game creators all over the world. So
Excellent.
thank you,
Absolutely.
Kate.
Thank you. Thank you. And have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Olá, manas e manos.
You are invited for the next edition of Game Jam Plus.
Quer criar o próximo grande jogo indie?
I'd like to invite my fellow flyover states and the rest of the world to come jam with us.
Mi nombre es Brian Hernández de Cartago, Costa Rica.
Patos de Minas, Minas Gerais.
Calgary, Canada.
Goiás.
São Luís,
Iran,
Liga Sul de Minas,
Portugal,
Brasília,
México,
Salvador,
Makedônia.
Uberaba, Minas Gerais.
San José, Costa Rica.
Uberlândia,
La Paz, Bolívia.
Manaus, Amazonas,
United States Midwest.
Atlanta, Slovenia.
Engenheiro Paulo Francisco.
Game Jam Plus? O que é Game Jam Plus?
En donde desarrolladores, músicos, artistas podrán crear su propio juego con un enfoque de negocios.
participants from all around the world come together.
É o local onde suas ideias tomam forma.
Y me complace mucho invitarlos a este gran evento.
I feel thrilled and blessed to have such an opportunity to be a part of this.
And I want you to unlock this achievement too.
Que es un evento internacional que va a tomar lugar del 8 al 10 de octubre.
From October 8 to 10th.
Entre el 8 y el 10 de octubre.
Dias 8 ao dia 10 de outubro.
This October, from the 8th to the 10th.
Dia 8 ao dia 10 de outubro.
Quiero invitarlos a formar parte de esta gran comunidad internacional.
It's going to be an incredible opportunity to make some games, meet some amazing people.
Espero haber más personas de todo el mundo participando de este gran evento.
Hope to see you there.
Participa, be our plus one.
Would you be our plus one?
Be a plus one.
Будете мой плюс N.
Be our plus one.
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 Be our plus one.